People can become so bound up by Satan. Is there anything that's keeping you bound, preventing you from being all that Jesus wants you to be? We have a tremendous subject today. Luke chapter 13 and verse 10. Luke 13 and verse 10. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. But when Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you're set free from your infirmity." Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Now here's a very simple scene. First of all, notice that Jesus was teaching in the synagogue. And I think it's very vital in this story that you see that it's a Sabbath day. Remember that the Pharisees and the scribes had added a tremendous number of rules and regulations to the Sabbath day. And the biggest confrontation they had with Jesus was over Sabbath day observance. Now, I've said this before and I say it again. We do not observe the Sabbath as Christians. We observe the first day of the week, the day of resurrection. So should anyone ever get into a marvelous discussion with you as to why you don't celebrate the Sabbath, you simply say, because that was the Jewish day of worship. We worship when Jesus came out of the tomb, the first day of the week being Sunday. But here was a problem, because the rules were so very special, you couldn't work on the Sabbath, you couldn't heal on the Sabbath because that was counted as work. And Jesus sees this woman there. She had been crippled, and she had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. Notice that. We'll come back on it. She is bent over and couldn't straight up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward. Now, what a moment this must have been. "Woman, you're set free from your infirmity." He put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Now, I don't know which church you go to, but let me remind you of something. If Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that power that flowed through him for that woman in a total healing when he laid on hands is no different today. And therefore we can still see within our church life, in our ministry, the laying on of hands and the healing of people. What a sad thing it is that in some churches they've given up all such action because they say, well, that was for that dispensation. It does not say that in the Word of God. Jesus is still the same, and I want you to know Jesus is still healing people. But let's go back a minute to verse 11. A woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. Is there anything in your life that has you bound, that has you as a prisoner, and it is not from God, it is from Satan? You've heard many times on this program where we've dealt with various areas that the spirits come into. They come into the alcohol, they come into that addiction area. We come against the stuff that's in the occult, especially in witchcraft, which are such a powerful hold. But any occult activity, they will have you bound. And because you've been saved, it doesn't mean those spirits have left. The spirits stay within our soul, within our body. No, they're not in our spirit. No, we're not possessed. But there is demonic activity within Christian believers. And isn't it interesting here that here is a Jewish woman, a daughter of Abraham, and the spirits have got hold of her so that physically she's in a problem. She was bent over double. And what I want you to see here is how powerfully these things can hold on. Now, she'd had it 18 years, but it had absolutely doubled her over. Very interesting. We watched a movie called Gods of the New Age. Some friends of ours had made it in India. They'd gone to the different ashrams that are run by the gurus, and it showed a woman in one of the streets of India, bent over double. The moment I saw her, I thought of this passage. Here she was. She could hardly walk. She was virtually walking on her feet and her hands. Can you imagine how Jesus felt as he looked at that woman, as he looked at this woman in the synagogue? He couldn't stand seeing what had happened. What happened in India? Well, if you talk to any Indian, they'd say, oh, don't worry about her. She's just living out her bad karma from a previous life. It's not anything to do with Satan. No. It's just bad karma. Can you either have good karma or bad karma? And according to that, so is your lot in life. And so nobody cares. So you see all these people starving to death. Well, don't you do anything? Oh, no. It's their bad karma. Well, what about you people who've got all the money? Well, that's our good karma. Can you see how Satan has that whole nation so deceived that with one sentence they just explain everything away? The weird thing is this. This nation is turning to India with its stupid ideas to find answers. That's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard. And people with intelligence are doing this and turning to these gurus where obviously they don't have any answers at all. When will we wake up and turn to the Lord our God, to his word and to his Son Jesus Christ, and find the answers that are there? She was bent over and couldn't straighten up at all. Let me tell you, if you have unforgiveness in your life, you can be bound by a spirit so that you are bent double, or you're eaten up with a paralysis so that you can't move. Unforgiveness does that. Oh, you say, Richard, you're going a bit far. No, I'm not. I was telling in our Bible studies a marvelous story. There was a man who trained in psychiatry as a Christian, and he wanted to work as a Christian counselor, and the Lord put him in a secular position. He said, Lord, I don't want to be there. Well, the Lord wasn't very interested in that because he had certain plans for this man. He told him very clearly, he said, go in with every patient, read over the notes, and I'll tell you the key problem. It wasn't very long before he found that the other men were sending the real problems to him. And this lady was coming in, and she was in a wheelchair, and he read over all the notes, and he prayed, and the Lord showed him very clearly her problem was unforgiveness. So they talked it over. And finally she wrote down 29 people against whom she had unforgiveness. Over a period of 3 months, she forgave everybody. She was out of the wheelchair. She was totally released. She was bound by a spirit of unforgiveness. These things are crippling. I think you've got to understand that. Now notice also what happened. Woman, you're free from your infirmity. Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up, and praise God. Can't you believe that? Can you imagine how she felt? And some of you today are waiting to be set free from the bondage of Satan. If you don't get an opportunity to talk to me in a few moments, don't hesitate to call the office, and we'll pray for you to be absolutely set free in Jesus. Jesus came to set the prisoners free, which may include you. You can be a prisoner to doubt, a prisoner to fear, a prisoner to a particular sin that is absolutely driving you, and behind it there's a spirit. You can be caught into this absolute addiction, which is another way of being bound up. You can be bound by the occult. There are 101 ways you can be bound, and Jesus wants his people free. Now, verse 14 is a little sad. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, the synagogue ruler said to the people, there are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath. Poor fellow. He's so absolutely tied up in the rules. He's so tied up in what's been taught from head office. He's so tied up in what the scribes have added to God's law. He hated to see a woman set free after 18 years. What's wrong with the man? Well, very simple. He had more legalism than love. And that can happen to you as a Christian as it happened to him as a Jew. And there's a real warning there. Remember that as far as God's concerned, people matter more than things. Look at verse 15. The Lord answered him, you hypocrites. By the way, Jesus wasn't being very polite at that moment. He's just being very direct. You hypocrites. Don't each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? That's work. They did that. But when they see a woman set free after 18 years, they're indignant. Can you see how far they were from the heart of God? What a warning. And then he adds, then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for these 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her? Oh, what a beautiful statement. Satan's had her bound 18 years. What better day than on the Sabbath to see her set free, to see her become a new woman? That's exciting. Verse 17 is fabulous. When Jesus said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things that Jesus was doing. I wonder how the ruler of the synagogue felt. I imagine he gulped, and he really deserved to. But he wasn't the only one there. You can be quite sure the committee was there. You remember the committee? Scribes and Pharisees sent out from Jerusalem to check up on Jesus. There's a new prophet in Galilee. Go and listen to him. Come back and tell us what he's teaching, what he's doing. Is he orthodox? They were there. And when Jesus addresses verse 15, he says it to the ruler of the synagogue, the local man, and he says it to the committee. You hypocrites. Verse 17. All his opponents were humiliated. And isn't it fantastic the way Jesus, as the master of the situation, always stood so clearly for what he believed, and no one could argue with him, because he always came back to the Word of God, and he had these people absolutely tied up, and the woman set free.